Welcome. What you are about to hear isn't just folklore. These are the whispers that cling to the Thai night. Picture a remote village at dusk, the air thick with the sound of insects and distant temple chants. Tonight, we uncover three chilling realities: a wife consumed by a hunger that isn't human, a pregnant mother's grief that learns to call your name, and a man who wears wings built from baskets when the moon disappears. These things are waiting at the edge of the light. Subscribe as we reveal the truths that walk just beyond the fire. Story 1. Pop starts eating from the inside. Narang was, by his own definition, a simple man. He believed in things he could touch: the worn teak of his porch, the weight of a coin in his palm, the calloused hand of his wife. Somchai. At 37, Somchai was the center of that tangible world. Their life was a loop, a simple, shared purpose woven from the steam of their noodle stall, the clatter of bowls, and the shared exhaustion at sundown. Their environment was the village, a place of predictable rhythms: the crow of a rooster, the distant drone of a long-tail boat on the canal, the smell of jasmine and damp earth. This was their normality, a life of work and quiet affection, relatable in its sheer, unadorned simplicity. This loop was why the first break, the first deviation, felt so profoundly wrong. It began, as all bad things do, on an ordinary evening. The monsoon rains had held off, and a thin, humid air settled over the houses. Narang was tending the stall alone, a fact that already pricked at him with a low-grade worry. Somchai had complained of a headache, a tiredness that clung to her like the humidity, and had retired to their home just after noon. Now, with the last customer gone, Narang cleaned the pots, his mind on the ledger, on the rising cost of galangal, on the slight, persistent rattle of the tin roof that promised a storm. He returned to their small house built on stilts, carrying a peace offering, a steaming bowl of jok moo, pork congee, fragrant with ginger and scallions. It was her favorite. "Somchai?" he called, pushing the door open. She was sitting on their sleeping mat, her back to the wall, staring at nothing. The single fluorescent bulb above them cast a cold, sterile light, draining the room of warmth. This was the first detail that felt wrong: the cold, blue interior of their home, which had always felt warm. "I brought you food, my love. You must be hungry." He knelt and placed the bowl before her. The steam rose in a fragrant curl, a small offering of their normal life. She did not look at it. She looked through it. "Somchai?" Slowly, she lifted her head. Narang's breath hitched. Her eyes, usually so bright and quick, were flat. They were like polished river stones, glassy and vacant. This was the tight on-eyes moment that would replay in his nightmares. The life behind them was gone. Then, she smiled. It was the single most terrifying thing Narang had ever witnessed. It was not Somchai's smile, not the one that crinkled her eyes and showed the gap in her teeth. This was a hollow smile, a placid, empty curve of the lips. It was a mask pulled taut over her features, something alien wearing her face. It was the smile of a stranger. "I'm not hungry," she said. Her voice was hers, but the cadence was wrong. It was flat, devoid of her usual music. "You haven't eaten all day," Narang insisted, his rational mind scrabbling for a foothold. "You're sick, you have a fever." He reached to touch her forehead. Her skin was cool. He looked at the bowl. The steam was already fading, the congee congealing. As he watched the last wisp of warmth disappear, a profound, icy dread began to seep into his bones. This was the cut to the empty bowl. Steam fading. It was the warmth leaving her, leaving their home. The refusal of food was not just sickness, it was a rejection of life itself. He argued, he pleaded, he tried to be angry. She simply watched him, that placid, glassy smile never wavering. He spent the night listening to her breathe, a shallow, metronomic sound that offered no comfort. The next morning, Narang, a man of modern sensibilities, did the modern thing. He borrowed his neighbour's motorbike and took Somchai to the district clinic. He believed in antibiotics, in blood tests, in charts. He did not believe in the whispers that had already started in the market, the sideways glances from the other vendors. The clinic was a concrete box painted a pale, peeling green. The air smelled of antiseptic and stale floor water. The whirring fans did little to move the heat, only stirring the same size stack of pamphlets on the doctor's desk. The light here was the same as in their home now, fluorescent, cold, and unforgiving. The doctor, a tired man with a perpetually furrowed brow, was thorough. He took her temperature. He checked her blood pressure. He shined a light into her glassy eyes and tapped her knees with a small rubber hammer. He drew blood. Throughout it all, Somchai was a perfect, compliant doll. She offered her arm. She breathed when asked. She followed his finger with her eyes, and she wore that smile. Narang sat on a plastic stool, twisting his hands. He tried to explain. She's not herself, doctor. She won't eat. She just sits. And that smile. The doctor grunted, non-committal. They waited an hour. Finally, the doctor called them back in, shuffling papers. "Well, Mr. Narang," he said, sighing as he sat, "I can't find anything wrong with your wife." Narang's heart hammered. "What do you mean, nothing?" "I mean, nothing. Her blood work is perfect. No fever, no infection. Vitals are normal. Physically, she is in excellent health." The doctor leaned forward, his expression shifting from clinical to vaguely sympathetic. "Is there stress at home? Money problems?" "No," Narang said, the word coming out as a croak. "No, nothing. Everything is normal. Normal." The word was a slap. The clinic finds nothing. This was the moment Narang's rational world cracked. Because if the doctor's normal was this, then the problem was something science couldn't name. The doctor gave them a small bottle of vitamins and suggested she get more rest. The ride home was silent. Somchai sat behind him on the motorbike, her hands resting lightly on his waist, a gesture so familiar it now felt like a violation. As they passed the market, he saw the neighbours. They stopped talking. They watched. He heard a snatch of a whisper, an old woman's voice, sharp and fearful. "Phi pop!" Narang accelerated, his knuckles white on the handlebars. "Phi pop! Ignorant, superstitious nonsense. A ghost story. A parasite from folklore that consumes its host from the inside, eating their organs, wearing their skin. A creature that rests by day and hunts by night." He rejected it. He held on to the doctor's words. Normal, stress, vitamins. But the terror had a new name. That night, the air was heavy and still. The impending storm had not broken. Narang lay on the mat beside Somchai. Her eyes were wide open in the dark, staring at the ceiling. He pretended to sleep, his entire body rigid. He was listening. Hours passed. The village was silent. Then, a breeze kicked up, skittering across their roof. The tin roof rattle was sudden and sharp, like claws on metal. It was a terrible omen, a sound that seemed to come from inside his own head. He must have drifted into a shallow, fitful sleep. He was jerked awake not by a sound, but by a change in the room, an absence. Somchai was gone. "Somchai," he whispered. Silence. He scrambled to his feet. The cold blue moonlight flooded the room, showing her mat, empty. He felt a spike of adrenaline so sharp it made him gag. He moved to the porch. From this porch, wide shot, the tree line at the edge of their small property was a solid wall of blackness, impenetrable. The night felt vast and hostile. Then he heard it. A squawk, a single, muffled, wet squawk from the chicken coop. It was not the sound of a fox or a snake. It was a sound of finality, Narang's hand shook as he grabbed the heavy flashlight by the door. He didn't run. He moved with a terrible, robotic dread, each step an agony. He rounded the corner of the house. The door to the coop was open, swinging slightly on one hinge. He aimed the flashlight beam. The light cut the darkness, illuminating a scene of impossible horror. The other chickens were huddled in a terrified mass in the far corner. In the center stood Somchai. She was still in her nightclothes. Her feet were bare in the dirt. Her head was cocked to the side, as if listening to a distant song. In her hands, she held one of their hens. The chicken was dead, its neck clearly broken. But that wasn't the horror. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle. She was just holding it, calmly. Narang's beam hit her face. The hollow, glassy smile was there. It was brighter, wider. In the harsh glare of the flashlight, she looked utterly, peacefully inhuman. She looked up at him, not with guilt or surprise, but with a look of mild annoyance, as if he had interrupted a private meal. This was the midnight chicken coop. This was the Feepop. The creature inside her was quiet by day, but at night, it had to hunt. It had to feed. Narang dropped the flashlight. It hit the dirt, the beam pointing sideways, illuminating their feet. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't scream. He could only stare at the woman who was not his wife, who stood in the dark holding death in her hands. The sun rose with a cruel, indifferent beauty. Narang had not slept. He sat on the top step of his porch, his body hollowed out, staring at the tree line that was no longer just trees. Inside, he could hear Somchai humming. She was sweeping the floor, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't been found in a chicken coop, as if she hadn't just watched him, with those dead eyes. As he retrieved the dead bird and stumbled back to the house, he was in a nightmare. A shadow fell over him. He looked up. It was Sorn, the village elder. He was an old man, his face a map of wrinkles, his eyes holding a wisdom that Narang had always dismissed as tradition. Sorn was not alone. Behind him stood two monks in saffron robes, their faces serene. Sorn did not ask what was wrong. He didn't need to. He had seen the whispers. He knew the signs. Son. Narang's voice was a dry rasp. The elder put a hand on his shoulder. It was heavy, grounding. You believed the doctor, Sorn said. It was not a question. You believed in his modern answers. Narang could only nod, shame and terror choking him. Sorn looked past him, into the cold blue interior of the house, where the humming continued. That which is old cannot always be cured by that which is new, the elder said, his voice low. The parasite is deep, Narang. It has taken root. He turned to the monks. We must be quick. The sun is high, and it is weak. But the night will come again. Sorn looked back at Narang, his eyes filled with a grim, terrible purpose. A new light, not the cold moonlight or the sterile clinic light, began to make itself known. It was the ember fire leaks from off-screen, the first sign of the ritual to come. We prepare the fire, Sorn declared. The ceremony begins now. The night did not fall. It consumed. It seeped from the jungle floor, leaked from the canopy, and pooled in the packed earth clearing, creating an arena of absolute black. Into this void, the villagers had driven stakes and built a fire. Narang watched, his skin prickling with a humidity that had nothing to do with the air and everything to do with the intent. The villagers formed the first ring, a tight perimeter of fear and grim duty. They were the wall of flesh. Inside them sat the monks, a smaller, more potent circle. Their saffron robes were stark, impossible splashes of colour against the oppressive night, luminous and defiant in the firelight. And in the centre, held loosely by two acolytes, sat Somchai. He was just a man, a thin man from the city, a man who had come seeking peace and had instead found this. His sadness had been a quiet thing, a private erosion, but here, in this place, his grief had become a beacon. The fire was lit. It did not crackle with warmth. It spat with a thick, resinous smoke. Billowing and thick, the smoke billowed, clinging low to the ground, smelling of green wood and something else. Something metallic and sharp, like old blood. Ash motes, tiny specks of incinerated offerings, floated in the air. They danced in the convection, catching the light, a swarm of tiny dead stars orbiting the man at the center. Then, the chanting began. It was not a song. It was a sound, a low guttural vibration that started in the chests of the saffron-robed monks and seemed to emanate from the earth itself. A chanting of sutras. At first, it was just a drone, a foundation for the silence. Narang felt it in his teeth, a seismic hum that set every nerve on edge. Somchai, his head bowed, seemed not to notice. He was limp, his body already surrendered to the fatigue that had plagued him for weeks. The head monk, an old man with a face like carved teak, raised a hand. The drone did not stop, but it changed. It began to layer, voices weaving over voices, the Pali script becoming a physical thing. The chanting thickened, rising in pitch and volume, building stratum by stratum until it was no longer sound, but pressure. It was, as the villagers had warned, an invisible wall. Story 2. The call of a pregnant mother. The silver-blue wash of the full moon was deceptive. It suggested coolness, a reprieve. But the air along the Mekong was thick, a humid blanket that clung to Akara's skin. He and Molly walked the packed earth path, their boots scuffing up a fine, pale dust. The river, a vast, muscular ribbon of black silk, slid by silently. The load calculations for the turbine housings are still giving me a headache, Molly said, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. The sediment modelling is just optimistic. It'll hold, Akara said, his mind only half on the dam. He was an engineer. He believed in numbers, in material tolerance and sheer stress. This project was his big break, a chance to prove himself. But for the last 48 hours, his focus had been fractured. "You've been quiet tonight, Kara," Molly murmured, linking her arm through his. "Still worried about the foundation pour?" "No, not that." He stopped, pulling her to a halt. "Listen, do you hear that?" Molly tilted her head. The night was a chorus of cicadas and the distant, liquid percussion croak of frogs. "Hear what? The generator at the village?" "No." "Shh." And then it came. It drifted from the dense, black wall of jungle that pressed up against the far side of the river. A woman's voice. At first, it sounded like weeping, a thin, desperate sound of profound, animal grief. Akara's skin prickled. The sound was deeply, terribly human. Then, as if catching its breath, the sound changed. It shifted into a lullaby, a simple three-note melody, hummed, not sung. It was a sound as old as motherhood itself, but it was wrong. Akara, who had a musician's ear, felt his teeth set on edge. The rhythm was off. The singer was always half a beat behind the measure, a dragging, dissonant cadence that made the simple tune feel broken. It was like listening to a recording played at the wrong speed, a warped, watery approximation of a song. "Someone's singing," he said, his voice low. "It's probably just wind in the bamboo," Molly said, giving his arm a tug. "Or a night bird. Some of them sound like cats or babies. Come on, the mosquitoes are starting to find us." He let her pull him along, but he couldn't shake the sound. Strange events repeat. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice, and it was saturated with a sorrow so deep it felt invasive. He glanced back at the black river, and for a second, the silver-blue moonlight on the water seemed to flicker, as if something had passed beneath the surface. He didn't sleep well. The sound, or the memory of it, haunted the edges of his dreams. The next day, there was oppressive, a glaring white sheet that bleached the colour from the landscape. The roar of earth movers and the percussive clang of rebar felt reassuringly solid. He was Akara. He was 24. He was an engineer. He believed in concrete and steel, but the unease clung to him like the humidity. During his lunch break, He bypassed the mess tent and walked into the village, bringing a small bag of batteries and sealed aspirin for Yai Somjit. The elder was sitting on the shaded porch of her stilt house, weaving a basket, her eyes, cloudy with cataracts but missing nothing, fixed on him as he approached. "The amulet I gave you," she said, not as a question. "You are wearing it." Akara touched the small, herb-filled leather pouch under his shirt. Yai Somjit had pressed it into his hand the day he'd arrived, a welcoming gift. "Yes, Yai, always." "Good. You are far from home, Kun, and the veil is thin here." "Yai," he began, trying to sound casual. "Are there stories? About the river? About voices?" Yai Somjit's hands stilled on the rattan. She looked not at him, but past him, towards the jungle. "There are many stories. They are not for Farang ears." "Molly heard it too," he lied. She looked at him sharply, detecting the falsehood. "No, Kun, she did not. Only you." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The water is hungry. It remembers everything that falls into it. The jungle. It remembers, too. It remembers the mothers who lost their children to fever. It remembers the children who never drew breath. And sometimes those memories get loud." A cold bead of sweat traced a path down Akara's spine. "Listen to me," she commanded, her small hand gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "There is a rule here. It is the only rule that matters. If you hear something call to you, something that sounds almost human, almost right, never answer it, never look for it, and never, ever follow it. Do you understand me, Akara? It wants you to look. It wants you to answer. That is how it gets its hooks in. No one else notices or believes, or rather, the one who does believe confirms his worst fears." He left her porch with his heart hammering a rhythm against his ribs. Her warning had not calmed him. It had validated the terror. He couldn't work. He told his foreman he needed to double-check the survey markers deep in the jungle, a lie that came easily. He needed to see. The engineer in him needed physical data. He pushed his way into the humid green, following the vague direction of the sound from last night. The air was still, the haze of the day filtering through the canopy in dusty, angelic beams. Insects droned, a low-voltage thrum. After 20 minutes of walking, he broke through a curtain of hanging vines into a small, silent clearing. And there it was. It was a spirit house, but not the brightly painted, well-tended ones in the village. This one was old, the wood grey and warped, leaning precariously on its stilts. It was dedicated to a mother, or the idea of one. Small, faded prayers on a stick were pushed into the soft earth around it. But the offerings were fresh. A single browning lotus, a small ball of sticky rice, already crawling with ants, and, tucked into the tiny wooden doorway, a small hand-carved wooden figure, no bigger than his thumb. It was a fetus, curled in on itself. He felt a wave of nausea, a dizzying sense of trespass. He took a step back, his boots snapping a dry twig. The silence of the clearing vanished. From the spirit house itself, or from the air directly around it, came the sound, not the lullaby, not the cry, a soft, expectant whisper. "Akara." Intensity increases. His name, spoken in a breathy, feminine sigh that seemed to hold a note of recognition. It was a sound that was wet, somehow, like words bubbling up through water. He didn't wait. He turned and crashed back through the undergrowth, vines tearing at his shirt, his heart trying to escape his chest. He didn't stop running until he burst from the tree line, back into the harsh, noisy, rational world of the construction site. He leaned against the wheel of a bulldozer, gasping for air, his hand clamped over his chest, beneath his palm. The amulet from Yai Somjit was radiating a gentle, steady warmth, a warm amulet flicker against the cold dread flooding his veins. That night, sleep was impossible. Molly was beside him, a still form in the dark, her breathing deep and even. He envied her. His world had tilted. The foundations of his logic were cracked. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the window. The moon was gone, hidden by a bank of thick, low clouds. The bungalow was silent. The generators shut down for the night. All he could hear was Molly's breathing and the frantic pulse in his own ears. Then, the crickets stopped. A total, suffocating silence fell over the compound, and the lullaby began. It wasn't by the river. It wasn't in the forest. It was right outside his window, so close he could hear the wet, smacking sounds of the singer's lips as she hummed the broken tune. Da-dum, da-dum. Pause. Da-dum. The half-beat-off rhythm scraped against his nerves. He squeezed his eyes shut. Never look. Never answer. The camera language of his mind switched to the night-flat black of the window. It was a perfect, dark rectangle, a void. He could feel her on the other side. He knew, with a certainty that defied all reason, that she was standing there, right at eye level, her face pressed close to the glass, waiting. The humming stopped, a small, sobbing sound. "Akara!" The voice was no longer a whisper. It was a plea, choked with tears. "Please, I'm so cold. My baby is so cold. Let me in. Just let me see him." He was frozen, a statue of ice. He wanted to wake Molly, to hide his face in her hair, to be in her world of logic and reason, but he couldn't move. "I know you're there, Akara. I can smell your warmth. Just open the window. Just one look." A soft, hesitant scratching sound began on the wooden window frame. Akara bit down on his knuckle to keep from screaming. His eyes were screwed shut so tightly he saw bursts of colour. And then the amulet on his chest ignited. It wasn't a gentle warmth now. It was a sudden, searing heat that burned his skin. It vibrated violently, a frantic, angry buzzing against his sternum. It was a physical, tangible, real thing. Intensity increases. Outside the window, the pleading voice changed. The sorrow vanished, ripped away in an instant, replaced by a sound of pure, venomous frustration. It was no longer a woman's voice. It was a low, guttural hiss that rattled the glass in the frame. The scratching became a furious, animalistic clawing at the wood. The amulet burned hotter, a single point of fiery, protective light in the oppressive dark. Akara didn't move. He just sat there, rigid, sweat-drenched, clutching the charm that was the only thing between him and the flat black silhouette at his window. He rocked back and forth, chanting Yai Somjit's rule under his breath like a prayer. Never answer, never look, never follow. The ritual was assembled at the bleeding edge of the jungle, a place where the tamed grasses of the village met the primal dark of the trees. They called it Lok Srey, the boundary of the weeping woman. It was a scar on the land. And tonight, they were here to perform surgery. Akara stood at the center of the clearing, the unwilling eye of a spiritual storm. He was the anchor, the bait. The haunting had attached itself to him on that first foolish trip into the woods, and it had not let go. Now, the village shaman, an old man with eyes like chipped obsidian, was preparing to sever the tether. The air was thick, a humid blanket that reeked of ginger blossoms and damp earth. Around Akara, the shaman's acolytes moved with a desperate precision, their faces hidden in shadow. This was the first of the visual motifs, the chalk sigils. They were not mere drawings, they were equations of banishment, a complex, spiraling diagram of protection etched into the dirt. The white chalk seemed to hum with a faint, nervous light, a brittle defense against the suffocating dark. The second motif followed, the incense rivers. Bundles of thick, hand-rolled incense were planted along the chalk lines, forming a perimeter. When lit, they didn't just smoke, they poured. The fragrant grey smog clung to the ground, creating a waist-high barrier, a smoky fortress designed to contain the living and repel the dead. And the final motif, the villagers. They huddled at the far edge of the clearing, their backs to the ritual. They would not, could not, look. Their averted gaze was a form of protection in itself. To see the entity was to invite it, to acknowledge its suffering and, in doing so, agree to share its burden. Akara had no such luxury. He was already seen. The shaman began the chant. It was a low, monotonous drone, a sound that seemed to pull at the very fabric of the night. This was the protective circle made audible. It was meant to be a wall, but the jungle did not listen. For a moment, there was only the drone of the chant and the hiss of the incense. Then, the first crack appeared in the night silence. It was not a roar, it was a sound of impossible grief, a wail of ultimate loss. And it was not one voice, but two. This was and it began not with a sight, but with a sound. The sound design of Akara's terror became horrifyingly real. As the user's note specified, it was a perfect, sickening binaural split from his left channel, inside his left ear. A woman's scream. It was not a scream of fear, but of longing. A mother howling for a child that had been torn from her. It was a raw, wet sound, thick with loss and rage. From his right channel, a different cry, the thin, reedy, desperate wail of an infant. It was a sound of cold, of hunger, of a life that ended before it had a name. The dual voices did not harmonize. They clashed. They tore at each other in Akara's mind, a stereo field of pure agony. The shaman's chanting tried to push back against the sound, to become the dominant frequency, but the two wails were too strong. They were the sound of a bond, severed by violence, a tragedy that had stained the land itself. The wall of incense smoke shuddered. The rivers stopped flowing outward and began to churn, coalescing in front of Akara. The smoke darkened, turning from grey to a bruised, oily black. It rose, twisting, solidifying. She appeared. She was not a woman. She was the memory of one. Her form was woven from shadow and moonlight. Her long, matted hair an extension of the jungle's own vines. Her face was a mask of pristine, white sorrow. Her mouth a perfect O from which the left channel's scream poured. In her arms, she cradled a bundle of shadow that vibrated with the infant's right channel cry. She was the source. She was the grief. The violence was not of blood, but of sound. The entity lunged, not at Akara, but at the protective circle. The moment her shadow form touched the perimeter, the chalk sigils flashed. They didn't just glow, they ignited, turning from white to charred, smoking black in an instant. The chalk lines burned away, the earth beneath them sizzling. The incense rivers were extinguished as if by a sudden, icy wind. The smoke barrier dissolved, leaving Akara exposed. The villagers whimpered, pressing their hands over their ears, but they did not turn. The shaman's chant faltered, his voice cracking with fear. The entity glided across the ruined circle. She stopped directly in front of Akara. He was frozen, a statue of pure, unadulterated terror. He tried to speak, to scream, but the binaural assault had paralyzed his senses. She did not touch him. She did not need to. She opened her mouth, and the dual voices, the mother's howl and the infant's shriek, merged into a single, deafening wave of psychic energy. It struck Akara. It was not a sound. It was an injection. Kara's mind was flooded. He felt the mud on his hands as he clawed at the earth. Searching, he felt the icy water of the river. He felt the stab of betrayal. He felt the cold, hollow emptiness of a mother's arms. And then, as the original text foretold, Akara fell to his knees and began to weep. But the tears were not his own. He was powerless. He was a vessel, overflowing with a sadness that did not belong to him. He was drowning in her grief, his own identity dissolving under the sheer weight of her loss. The ghost was not attacking him. It was overwriting him. This was the moment the wound in his inner ear was carved. It wasn't a physical scar, but a psychic one. A channel had been opened, and it could not be closed. The shaman roared, a final, desperate surge of will. He shattered his ritual staff on the ground, invoking the final banishing verse. A flash of white light, a concussive force. The world snapped back, The dual voices were pushed back, sucked into the jungle as if by a powerful vacuum. The sound faded, retreating from the clearing, back to the boundary, back to the river. The binaural assault resolved to silence. The clearing was still. The only sound was Akara, gasping on the scorched earth. He was safe. Hold a 2-beat pause. But the ritual had failed. Not in its mechanics. The entity was gone. The fade to boundary was successful. The immediate threat was over. The ritual failed because it was designed to cut a cord. Instead, it had fused it. The shaman had banished the manifestation, but he had sealed the emotion inside Akara. He rose, shaking. The villagers turned, their faces pale and etched with pity. The shaman looked at Akara, not with triumph, but with deep, profound sorrow. The protective circle was a ring of ash. The link was cut, but the sadness remained. The unceasing sadness. Years passed. The jungle was a distant memory, a green nightmare replaced by the concrete and steel of a high-rise. Akara lived in the city now, surrounded by the noise of traffic and the anonymity of millions. But time is not a cure. It is 3 a.m. He stands at his city window, the neon glow of the street below painting his face in colors of electric blue and poison red. The apartment is silent, but not for him. He can still hear it. Sometimes he still hears, very faintly, like an echo across many years. It is no longer a binaural assault. It is a whisper, a ghost in his auditory nerve, the left ear longing, the right ear cold. He looks at his reflection in the dark glass. His face is calm, but his lips are moving with no sound. He is whispering back, a conversation with a grief that has become his own. The ritual had cut the cord, but it had left the wound. And the wound, he knew, would never, ever stop weeping. The echo of that night remains. What do you think Akara whispers to the darkness? Was the ritual a failure or a curse in disguise? Let me know your theories in the comments below. This story is far from over. If you felt that chill, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories from the Shadowlands. Click the bell icon so you never miss a chapter. Story 3. The man with wings made of rice baskets. The rot came first. A sour, invasive stench that settled over the remote Isan village like a shroud. It was not the familiar smell of composting vegetation or the sharp tang of buffalo dung. This was a rank, metallic odor, the smell of offal left in the sun, of something profoundly wrong. It clung to the humid air, thickest near the edge of the hamlet where the communal garbage pits festered. But this was new. The pits, once dormant mounds, were being disturbed. Fresh soil was turned nightly, the refuse violently scattered as if by a great, frantic animal. Worse, there were the marks around the latrines, deep, 3-pronged scratches gouged into the packed earth and the flimsy wooden doors, splintering the timber. Fear, quick and acidic, soured the villagers' meager meals. They gathered in the oppressive afternoon heat, their voices low and sharp. The accusation, when it finally came, was aimed like a spear. "It is Chayo," Prawet spat, his face dark. Pravet was a man of quick angers and simpler fears, and his gaze was fixed on the small, silent hut at the village's periphery. Who else? Boone, the village elder, shifted on the bench, his joints aching. He looked at Prawet, then at the other anxious faces. Chio is a quiet man. Prowett, he works at night. He lurks, Prowett corrected, jabbing a finger toward the hut. He works no fields. He buys no feed. Yet he eats. His house is always dark, even when the moon is full. And his eyes, I saw him at the market last week. His eyes shine in the shadows, like a cat, like a demon. The word hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Chayo, 43 years old, was a man woven from shadows. He arrived years ago, took the abandoned hut, and spoke only when necessary. He would vanish for days, then reappear with just enough money for rice and fish sauce, his face gaunt. He was the village's anomaly, and in a place defined by the crushing, predictable rhythm of labour, anomaly was a synonym for threat. He is the one defiling the pits, Prowett insisted. He is the source of the smell, Boone sighed. It was not justice Prowett wanted, it was an exorcism, but the fear was real, the claw marks were real. Tonight, Boone said, his voice heavy. We will watch, Prowett, you, and 2 others. We will see what ghost digs our trash. Night fell, not with the softness of relief, but with the weight of a closing fist. The kerosene halos from the lamps in the main square felt pathetic. Small islands of light in an ocean of encroaching darkness. Boone, Prowett, and 2 younger men, armed with machetes and rice sickles, settled into the thick, thorny brush that overlooked Chayo's property. This was the camera's view, a paranoid point of view from the brush, obscured by sharp leaves and the warp of the humid air. Chayo's hut was a box of shadow, barely 50 meters away. The weight was agonizing. Insects droned. A gecko called, its sharp tock-tock-tock grating on Prowett's nerves. The stench was strong here, thick with the iron tang of blood and ammonia. Boone felt a coldness settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the night air. He was watching a man's home, preparing to condemn him, and the shame of it warred with a primal fear. Nothing, Prowett whispered, his voice tight. He is... A scrape. It was not loud, but it was distinct. The sound of wood on wood. They froze. The single rickety door to Chayo's hut was moving. It opened not with a smooth swing, but in a slow, scraping arc, revealing an interior of absolute black. And then, the silhouette reveal, a figure emerged, framed against the void. It was not the Chayo they knew. This shape was wrong. Hunched forward, burdened, its shoulders were impossibly broad, its posture cramped, as if it were struggling to fit through the doorway. It took a step into the moon-dappled clearing, and Prowett's breath caught in his throat. By the spirits! One of the young men choked out. The moonlight caught the thing on its back. It was a structure, a terrible, organic construct of woven bamboo, bound to the man's spine and shoulders with thick, greasy-looking ropes of sinew. It was made from the flat. Wide-brimmed baskets used for threshing rice, dozens of them, shattered, layered, and fused together into a pair of massive, grotesque wings. This was the symbolism made manifest, a curse woven into daily labour, the tools of his harvest, the very implements of his survival in the dusty fields of Isan, had become his monstrous burden, his damnation. They were stained, the bamboo splinters dark with filth, and they clicked and rustled with his every pained movement. Chayo, if it was Chayo, stood for a moment, his head tilting, sniffing the air. His eyes, just as Prowett had claimed, caught the distant kerosene light and flared with a faint internal iron-red glow. "Monster!" Prowett bellowed, breaking the spell. He would not let this thing live. He burst from the brush, raising his machete. "It's him! Kill it!" The other men surged forward, their fear eclipsed by a sudden, violent rage. Chayo spun. A sound tore from his throat, a dry, guttural hiss of pure panic. He was cornered. He saw the raised blades, the faces of his neighbours twisted in hatred. He did not run. He crouched, his body tensed, the muscles in his back knotting visibly under the bindings. The woven wings on his back suddenly expanded. unfurling with the sound of a dozen stiff mats being snapped open. They were not for beauty, they were for utility. They were stained, horrifying, and real. He leapt. It was not a flight of grace. It was an impossible ascent, a desperate, violent lurch against gravity. The bamboo wings beat the air once, a heavy, percussive thwack that kicked up a storm of dust and dry leaves. The force of it staggered Prawet. Chayo rose, his body angled awkwardly. He was airborne. The men stopped, their machetes falling slack, their mouths hung open. The camera angle shifted, looking up from the ground, framing the fugitive against the stars. The sky became a vast negative space, swallowing the dark, struggling shape. Chiyo, the man who was a shadow, was now a silhouette against the heavens. He clawed at the sky, his legs dangling uselessly. The wings beat again, a creaking, straining rhythm, each movement an agony. He was not soaring, he was fleeing. The faint iron-red glow from his eyes was the only part of him that seemed alive, a pair of dying embers floating away. He drifted over the treetops, a new and terrible constellation, until he was gone, absorbed by the night. Silence descended, heavier and more profound than the stench. The four men stood in the dirt, breathing hard, their weapons useless. Prawet was the first to lower his arm. His face was pale, his bravado shattered, replaced by a deep, resonant terror. He had been right. The thought brought him no comfort. Boone walked slowly to the open door of Chayo's hut. He lit a match. The hovel was bare, a sleeping mat, a water jug, and in the corner, piles of broken bamboo, half-woven baskets, and scraps of twine, the tools of his curse. But there was something else, scrawled on the dirt floor, as if with a finger, were words. Not a message, but a repetition. It hurts. It hurts. It hurts. The physical scar was the abandoned hut, a monument to a truth they could not process. The mental scars were deeper. Prawet, who had been the loudest, became the quietest. He never spoke of that night, but he would be found staring at the sky, flinching at the sound of rustling bamboo. Boone resigned as elder the next day. How could he lead a village when the laws of nature he upheld were so easily broken? The village knew, and that knowledge was a poison. They patched the latrines, but they avoided the garbage pits. They locked their doors, no longer against thieves, but against the sky. The village of Isan endured. The sun rose, the rice was harvested, but the community had survived the event, not the implication. They were survivors of a revelation that had hollowed them out, leaving them just functional shells. And Chayo, he, too, endured. He had abandoned the place, escaping his accusers but not his affliction. He was still out there, a figure of dark folklore, condemned to fly on wings of toil. He was a creature of the night, forever fleeing, forever in pain, trapped between the earth he could no longer walk and the sky that would not have him. He was not free. He was, like the village he left behind, barely surviving. The air in the stilt house was thick with the smoke of dried herbs and a history that did not belong to them. For weeks, Aaron and May had chased the phenomenon, the acrid, sulphurous scent that preceded its arrival, the viscous, shimmering trail it left on the packed earth, the terrifying, faint red glow that pulsed in the deep jungle, a beacon of pure malice. They had arrived in this remote village, the epicenter of the original sightings, expecting to find a curse, a Phai Krashu, a tomb. Instead, they found Tam. She was ancient, her eyes clouded by cataracts but lucid with a sharpness that belied her frail frame. She sat on a woven mat, packing a short, thick cheroot with dark tobacco. She was the only one who hadn't fled when they asked about the red light. "You hunt a ghost," she stated, not asked. Her voice was like dry leaves skittering on stone. "We hunt what's been taking the cattle," Aaron said, keeping his voice respectful. "We hunt what's been terrifying the outer settlements." Tam lit the cheroot, the flare of the match illuminating the deep canyons of her face. "You hunt a man, or what is left of one." She exhaled a cloud of fragrant smoke, and the story began. It was, She called it the third story, the one that explained the other two. It was the story of Chayo. It did not begin in the dark, Tam said, her eyes fixed on the jungle outside the open window. It began in the light, right here. Her narrative transported them. The sound of morning birdsong, bright and cheerful, was the first casualty of the day. It was undercut by a low, dissonant hum, not a sound, but a pressure in the air. It was the sound of 100 heartbeats, 100 pairs of angry, frightened feet moving as one. They surrounded his small house on the edge of the rice fields. The entire village. They carried torches, still smoking from the night's fear, and harvest sickles that were not meant for rice. They were a wall of accusation, and on his porch sat the accused, Chayo. He was not a monster. He was a carpenter, a quiet man whose wife had died the year before. He was just a man. But he was also the source, the smell. A copper and sulphur stench clung to him, a perfume of decay he could not wash off. The earth around his home was stained with the residue that now plagued their jungle. He did not rise. He did not arm himself. He just sat, his hands resting on his knees, looking at the neighbours who had shared his food and festivals. "He is cursed," shouted the village headman. "He brings the pestilence. It follows him," another screamed. The fire. It waits for him in the dark." Chayo watched them. The fear in their eyes was so pure, so potent. It was almost a physical thing. He could smell it over his own stench. He had known this was coming. He had seen the way they pulled their children inside when he walked by, the way the market vendors would no longer take his money. He waited for the noise to die down, for the wall of hatred to become a ring of expectant silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was not a plea, but a statement of pure, hollowed-out exhaustion. "Do you think I chose this?" The question hung in the humid air. Simple and devastating, it disarmed no one. Fear is a stone that does not care about the water's ripple. "Did you think I wanted my crops to wither in their soil?" Chayo continued, his voice cracking. "To smell my own skin rotting while I still breathe? To see that light?" He stopped, unable to name the red glow that haunted his own shadow. "It is a sickness. I am sick. You are unclean," the headman spat. "You must go. Take your sickness from our land." Chayo looked at them. He saw his wife's cousin, the man who had helped him build this very porch, the old woman who had taught him to weave baskets. Their faces were wood, carved into masks of righteous terror. He had no argument left. He had spent it all, bargaining with the sky, with the forest, with the indifferent gods who had stained him. "I will leave," he promised. It was a whisper. "I will walk until I can walk no more. Just let me gather my wife's things." "No," the headman said. The word was final. "You will not take the stain with you. You will not touch anything. You will leave now, with nothing but the clothes you wear." This was the sentence. Not just exile, but erasure. Chayo stood up. The crowd tensed, sickles rising. He did not move toward them. He turned his back, a gesture of such profound defeat it was almost mistaken for aggression. He stepped off the porch and onto the long dirt road that led away from the village, away from the only life he had ever known. He did not look back, not once. They watched him until he was a speck on the horizon, Tam said, her voice dropping. They stood there for an hour, just to be sure. They were so relieved. They thought the curse was walking away. May leaned forward. "But it wasn't. Fear is hungry," Tam murmured. "It is not satisfied by a departure. It demands a sacrifice. It demands a cleansing." That night, the village celebrated its deliverance, and to ensure the curse could never find its way back, they burned Chayo's house to the ground. They burned his tools, his bed, the small wooden hairpin that had belonged to his wife. They poured salt on the earth. They wanted to burn the memory, Tam said. All they did was burn the man. The man was gone. But the monster was just born. The village had a few weeks of peace. The air smelled sweet again. The children played in the fields. Then the rumors began. They flew in on the wind, carried by traders and monks from a settlement 2 valleys over. A strange sickness, a foul smell on the night air, a strange, oily trail found near the buffalo pens, and a low, red glow seen pulsing deep in the trees. They had not banished the curse, Tam said, her voice a low growl. They had only given it legs. They had created a wanderer. He just wanted to live quietly. The village just wanted its peace. But the curse, the sickness, it doesn't care what we want. She looked out the window again. He is still out there. He cannot die. He cannot rest. He is just moving. And where he moves, the Kraju is seen. Fear creates monsters. Child, long after curses do. The story settled over Aaron and May. A suffocating weight as pieces of their hunt clicked into place with horrifying, tragic clarity. The smell, May said, her hand over her mouth. That sulfur and copper. It's not a demon. It's him. It's the smell of his body, the sickness. Aaron nodded, his face grim. The trail. We thought it was the residue of a spirit passing through. It's the residue from him. From his feet, his hands. He's leaving a physical trail of his own affliction. They had been following the footprints of a man so consumed by a disease, biological or supernatural, that his very presence stained the earth, the red glow, the terrifying floating light they had glimpsed twice, the thing that had driven them on this hunt. It's not a floating head, Aaron whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. My God, it's him. The sickness. It's bioluminescent. It's a part of him. When he walks in the dark, he is the one glowing red. He's not the hunter. He's the lantern. All the hauntings they had tracked, the stolen fish, the scattered chickens, were not the acts of a predator. It was a starving, exiled man, too sick and too terrifying for anyone to help, trying to survive. They weren't hunting a monster. They were hunting a victim. The sky, Tam said, tapping the ash from her cheroot. It does not belong to the village. It does not belong to him. It just watches. Aaron and May stood, the new weight of their purpose settling on them. This was no longer an exorcism. It was a rescue, or a mercy. They walked out of Tam's house into the oppressive, moonless night. The air was still. They were miles from the last sighting, but they both looked up, scanning the horizon, the great black void between the mountain peaks. And then they saw it. It was exactly what Tam's story had promised. Far to the west, barely visible, a faint reddish arc crossed the blackness of the sky. It wasn't a meteor. It wasn't a star. It was moving too slowly, tracing the path of a valley. It was Chayo, the outcast, the origin, the living ghost, still walking his long dirt road. He was a faint smear of red against the indifferent dark, a man who had become a rumour, forever looking for a place to rest. What do you think connects these 3 forms of hunger? We've explored the hunger of a lost soul, the gnawing hunger of bottomless sorrow, and the physical hunger of a body bound by a curse. Which of these invisible forces do you believe is the most terrifying? And do you believe such powerful desires can truly outlive the body, taking on a life of their own? In Thai spiritual belief, the veil between our world and the spirit world is perilously thin. It's a common understanding that intense, unresolved emotions, profound grief, binding love, or a thirst for vengeance don't simply vanish upon death. Instead, they can anchor a spirit to a place or even a person. This is why the warning to never answer a strange call in the night is taken so literally. It's not just superstition, it's a fundamental rule of spiritual defense. To acknowledge the call, even with a word, is to open a doorway. It's an invitation. As we've seen, these entities are rarely banished. They just wait at the edge of the light for us to look. I truly want to hear your perspective. Have you ever felt a presence you couldn't explain, or heard a local story that echoes these themes? Share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. And if you wish to continue this journey into the shadows, please subscribe and turn on all notifications so you don't miss the next chapter.